The roll of paper towels fell from the counter and unraveled across the kitchen floor. That's what I remember most clearly. Not the sting in my chest. Not the way my legs forgot how to hold me up. Not even the way her voice pierced the quiet like a blade through wet paper. No, it was that stupid roll, spiraling and tumbling like it had somewhere better to be. She didn't know I was there. She thought I was still at the hardware store. And honestly, I should have been. If the cashier hadn't needed a price check on fertilizer, I wouldn't have walked through the door 5 minutes early. I wouldn't have hurt her. I wouldn't be writing this. But life's cruel like that. I wasn't even trying to listen. I was in the mudroom, shaking off my boots. I had a bag of screws in one hand and a receipt in my mouth. And then came the sentence that cracked the world open. He's just filler. I don't even think of Everett as a person anymore. There was laughter. Not hers, someone else. A man. And then she laughed too. A sharp, bright sound that made me sick to my stomach. I'd heard her laugh like that before. Just not at home. Not with me. I didn't make a sound. I stood there, staring at the cracked tile I always meant to replace, with drywall dust still clinging to my jeans. I waited to feel something. Anger. Disbelief. Rage. But all I felt was small. Not the kind of small you feel in a crowd or on your worst day at work. I mean the kind of small that makes you question if you ever really existed in someone's eyes, or if you were just the shadow cast by their convenience. I backed out the door. Quietly. Methodically. Like I was sneaking out of my own life. I didn't take anything. Not even my jacket. I got in the truck, started driving, and didn't stop until I ran out of gas 70 miles south of our house. The irony? I had a full gas can in the truck bed. I just didn't want to get out. I sat there for a long time. Wind shaking the branches. Empty fields on both sides of the road. I didn't even turn on the heat. I just sat there in the cold and thought about the paper towels, unwinding on the kitchen floor like some kind of cruel metaphor. Back then, I still thought that was the worst of it. It wasn't. Because 3 days later, someone sent me a video. An anonymous email. No subject line. Just one attachment and 3 words in the body of the message. You should know. I didn't open the video right away. It just sat there in my inbox like a dormant grenade, when I wasn't sure I had the courage to pull the pin on. For nearly an hour I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the trackpad, my reflection dim in the black of the laptop. The email had no name, no warning, no explanation, just those 3 cold words. You should know. Eventually, I clicked. The video wasn't long. 42 seconds. Just enough to dismantle 17 years of memories. It had been filmed from across a dimly lit restaurant, cheap tablecloths, fake candles, a place Dana always said was too greasy for her tastes. And yet, there she was. My wife. My Dana. Her hand resting comfortably on another man's wrist as they leaned in close, heads nearly touching. She was smiling in a way she hadn't smiled with me in years, wide, unguarded, hungry. Then, the sound kicked in. The voices were muffled at first, but then she leaned even closer to him, her fingers lightly brushing his jaw. And in that same voice she once used to whisper goodnight to me, she said, "He's a placeholder. You're the one I think about." I closed the laptop. Slowly. Like I was afraid it might explode. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't punch a wall like you see in movies. I just sat back in the creaky motel chair, stared at the peeling floral wallpaper, and realized this wasn't a one-time slip. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was deliberate. Practiced. She'd done it before, probably more than once. And this time, someone had decided I deserved to know. I thought about calling her. Not to fight, not to beg, just to hear if her voice would crack when I told her I knew. But I didn't. I didn't want her to control the narrative. Not anymore. Instead, I replied to the anonymous email. Who are you? Why did you send me this? I didn't expect a reply. But within minutes, it came. We've never met. I work at her firm. I've seen things you probably haven't. This isn't the first time. If you want the truth, I'll tell you everything. But not over email. My stomach twisted. I wasn't sure if this was some twisted prank or someone trying to help. Either way, it felt like the edge of something I couldn't unsee. I replied again. Where? The response was immediate. Gleason's Cafe. Noon tomorrow. Come alone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the motel bed, fully clothed. Max curled up beside me like he knew everything had shifted. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow, casting long shadows on the cracked paint, and wondered what kind of life I had been living, what kind of husband I had been. Had I been blind? Or had she just become that good at hiding? I replayed every odd moment. The spa weekends that didn't quite add up. The late-night texts she said were from the girls. The moments she seemed to drift away even when I was sitting right beside her. Maybe I was boring. Maybe I was just easy, quiet, predictable. But I never thought I was disposable. The next morning, I dressed like I was heading to a funeral. Because in a way, I was. I was preparing to bury the version of my life I thought was real. I drove to Gleason's early, sat in the parking lot, and waited for the clock to tick past noon. And then she walked in. Not Dana. A woman I'd never seen before. Late 20s, red scarf, sharp eyes. She looked around, spotted me instantly, and came over like this had all been rehearsed. "You're Everett," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I'm Elise. I think you need to hear this." I nodded. I didn't say a word. My throat was tight, my hands cold. Elise leaned in. "She's been seeing him for over a year. His name's Mason. He's not her first. But he's different. He's involved in more than you think. And she's planning something. Something you don't know about. Yet." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean planning?" Elise looked around, lowered her voice. "She's not just cheating on you, Everett. She's building a new life. And she's been doing it with your name on everything." And just like that, the world I thought had already shattered cracked wide open again. The moment Elise said those words, "She's building a new life with your name on everything," something inside me went still. Like all the thoughts swirling in my head hit a wall and just dropped. I couldn't speak, couldn't blink. I just stared at her, waiting for some kind of clarification, some hint that maybe I'd misheard her or misunderstood what she meant. But Elise didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and waited for me to catch up. I finally managed to whisper, "What do you mean by that?" "My name on what?" She opened her purse and pulled out a small folder, sliding it across the cafe table with both hands like it was something radioactive. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were a dozen printed documents, screenshots, photos, legal forms, email printouts, flight confirmations, hotel bookings. And all of them had my name somewhere, either as the payer, the emergency contact, or, more disturbingly, the secondary account holder. "Where did you get these?" I asked. "I work in admin at her office," she said, her voice low. "I handle records for travel reimbursements and vendor contracts." I started noticing patterns. Dana would list you on everything, but the receipts told a different story. She was going on these trips with someone else. At first, I thought maybe you were just separated or had an agreement. But then I overheard her talking in the break room last week. She said she was going to drain everything before the end of the quarter and be free by summer. She laughed. I don't know why, but that laugh, it just got to me. My pulse was pounding. I could feel sweat building on the back of my neck, and my fingers trembled as I picked through the pages. There was a lease application for an apartment in Ohio under both of our names. A credit card statement showing purchases at high-end stores I'd never set foot in. And a letter, an actual, signed letter from a real estate agent confirming a mortgage pre-approval, using my income, my credit, and somehow my digital signature. She forged this, I muttered, the paper crinkling in my grip. That signature isn't even close to mine. Elise nodded grimly. She submitted digital forms using your info, probably using documents she already had access to. Tax returns, pay stubs, whatever. She's clever, but reckless. She's hoping no one's looking too closely. I sat back, stunned. Dana had always been methodical. Everything in her life was color-coded, symmetrical, neat. This wasn't just cheating. This was orchestration. She wasn't walking away from me. She was stealing the floorboards from under my feet before I could notice they were gone. How long? I asked, barely able to get the words out. From what I can tell, at least 14 months. Mason showed up in her world about a year ago. I think it started earlier, but that's when things got official. He's flashy. Real estate. He talks big, acts like he owns every room he walks into. I've seen them together. They're not hiding. Just careful. She uses you as the shield. That's what made me reach out. You're the ghost. The one paying for the fantasy. I felt nauseous. Everything started sliding into place. Her long weekends with friends, the sudden interest in yoga retreats, the wine-soaked girls' nights where she came home hours late, smelling like someone else. And all this time, I thought I was being supportive, trusting, giving her space. I thought I was being a good husband. Turns out, I was just the wallpaper. Bland, unnoticed, easy to replace. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to stay calm. My instinct was to get up, drive straight home, and confront her with every document Elise had just given me. But something stopped me. A deep, cold instinct I didn't know I had. If she was planning something this big, if she was already forging documents, preparing to vanish, dragging my name with her, then a confrontation might not stop her. It might accelerate everything. I had to be smarter. Why are you helping me? I asked Elise, genuinely confused. You don't even know me. She hesitated, then looked down at her coffee. Because I watched my father go through the same thing. My mom nearly ruined his life. Took everything and made him believe it was his fault. He didn't fight back. He didn't even know how. I guess. I see something familiar in you. Her words stung more than I expected. Because she was right. I didn't know how to fight back. I didn't even know where to start. But maybe I didn't have to fight alone. I stood, thanked her, and left the cafe with the folder clutched tightly in my hands. As I walked to my truck, a single thought replayed in my head like a broken tape. If she wants to build a new life using my name, she's going to learn just how much damage I can do to the one she's living now. I didn't go back to the motel. I couldn't. Sitting there, staring at cracked ceilings and musty curtains, waiting for everything to collapse, it didn't feel like an option anymore. I needed movement. Action. I needed to feel like I was doing something. So I drove. Nowhere in particular, just aimless roads threading through empty fields. My brain was buzzing, piecing together every inconsistency from the last year like jagged shards of glass. How long had she been using my name? Was it just the lease, the mortgage, the credit lines? Or was there more? Things I hadn't even discovered yet? Medical bills? Loans? False taxes? At some point, I pulled into a public library just off Route 89. It was one of those small-town places where everything smells faintly like old books and cleaning spray. I sat at one of the corner computers, opened a private browser window, and started digging. First, I checked our joint credit report, something we hadn't done together in years. And it hit me like a brick. 2 new lines of credit opened in my name. One at a furniture store in Ohio. Another attached to an account with a private moving company. Then came the tax filings. I couldn't access everything right away. Some of it needed PINs and authentication codes. But even the initial overview made my stomach turn. Someone had submitted a preliminary return under my social security number. Early. Too early. And listed a change of address I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. She was preparing to vanish. Not next year. Now. It was in motion. Like watching a slow building landslide you'd only just realized you were standing beneath. It wasn't just cheating. This was fraud. Full-on identity manipulation. And I had been asleep at the wheel while she redesigned our life without me in it. My hands were shaking. Not from rage, but from something colder. That eerie kind of panic where you realize you might lose everything before you even know what's gone. I printed out every scrap of documentation I could find, every transaction, address change, account number. The librarian gave me a funny look when I dumped 20 pages into my backpack without so much as organizing them. I didn't care. I got back in the truck, turned off my phone, and drove to the only person I could think of who might still have my back. My brother, Caleb. Now, Caleb and I hadn't been close in years. We didn't fight. We just drifted. Different lives, different cities, different paths. He was always the one with ambition, the talker, the guy who made deals over cigars and remembered people's birthdays. I was the guy who fixed his vending machines. But if there was one person who could understand what was happening, who could help me sort through the chaos, it was him. I showed up at his place just after dark. No warning. Just knocked on his door with a backpack full of printed lies and betrayal. He opened the door, stared at me for a second like he was trying to remember if I was real, and then stepped aside without saying a word. 30 minutes later, we were sitting at his kitchen table, a bottle of bourbon between us, and my entire story laid out in pieces. I told him everything. From the overheard call in the kitchen to Elise at the cafe, to the fake mortgage, the new credit lines, and the early tax return. When I was done, he sat back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Everett, he said slowly, you married a damn ghostwriter for crime novels. I married someone who doesn't think I'm a person anymore, I muttered. She said it herself. We sat in silence for a while. Caleb refilled our glasses, then reached for the folder Elise had given me. Do you have anything digital? He asked. Screenshots, videos, copies of those emails? I nodded. Everything's on the flash drive in my glove box. Good, he said. Because if this goes sideways, you're going to need more than a sob story and some paper. You're going to need proof. Real proof. And that's when he pulled out his phone and made a call. A short, Clipped conversation I couldn't quite follow. Something about metadata, secure backups, timestamps. When he hung up, he turned to me and said, "You're staying here for a few days. Don't contact her. Don't log into anything using your home network. And whatever you do, don't go back to that house. Not yet." "Why?" I asked. He smiled grimly. "Because I've seen this kind of thing before, brother. She's not just stealing your identity. She's burying you under it. And if you make one wrong move, she'll make sure the next time someone hears your name, it's attached to a criminal record." My mouth went dry. "She's building a story," he said, pointing to the documents. "But she doesn't know we're building one too. Let's make sure ours is louder." And that night, for the first time in weeks, I felt something unfamiliar. Not peace, not hope, but purpose. The next morning, I woke up in Caleb's guest room, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like old cedar and faint aftershave. My head throbbed from the bourbon, but my mind was electric. It was like something had finally clicked in my body, something that hadn't functioned in years. I didn't feel strong, exactly, but I felt awake. Like my nerves had been sleepwalking through the last decade, and now every single one of them was wide-eyed and screaming. Caleb was already in the kitchen. He had a dry erase board leaned up on the counter, bullet points scribbled in red marker, documents, timeline, motive, witness. He wasn't playing around. He wasn't emotional, either. He was treating this like a business deal gone sour, one that needed to be dissected and burned down strategically. "Coffee's fresh," he said without looking up. "You're gonna need it." I poured a mug and sat across from him. We dove in, line by line, event by event. He asked me everything: when Dana started changing, when the weekend trips began, how often we spoke during the day, how she handled the bills. It was brutal. Every answer I gave felt like I was peeling skin off my own life. And then, around mid-morning, Caleb asked something I hadn't expected. "Do you know anything about Mason? The guy she's with?" I hesitated. "Not much. Elise just said he's flashy. Real estate. Likes being in control." Caleb narrowed his eyes. "Did she say what kind of real estate?" I didn't ask. He tapped his fingers on the counter, thinking. "There's a guy I used to work with, sort of a fixer. Handles background checks for investors. If this Mason guy's legit, we'll know. If he's not, we might find something we can use." Within the hour, Caleb was on the phone again. I listened as he gave the guy Mason's full name, taken from one of the hotel confirmations Elise had printed, and the company he was supposedly tied to. Caleb's voice was calm, clipped, professional. He handed over every detail we had, and then told the guy to dig. While we waited, we pulled up a whiteboard app and began building a digital timeline. Dana's weekend trips, her expense reports, the new credit lines, the fake lease, the mortgage attempt, the early tax return. Each piece was a thread, and together they formed a map of deception so calculated it made me nauseous. But the part that truly broke me was a tiny line entry Caleb found on one of her credit cards, charged to a children's clothing boutique 2 towns over. She never told me she wanted kids again. After years of infertility, she said she'd made peace with it. I didn't press her. I thought she just needed space to heal. But now, there was no baby. There was just pretense. "Maybe she's shopping for someone else," I offered weakly, knowing how pathetic it sounded the moment I said it. Caleb didn't even answer. He just looked at me like he was watching someone drown while clutching a brick. By early afternoon, Caleb's guy called back. "Mason Trimble," he said, voice on speaker. "Not who he says he is. Real estate's a stretch. He was licensed 5 years ago but got flagged for fraud. Nothing stuck, but there are whispers. Also, he's got a trail of short-term LLCs, shell companies, probably. He opens them, runs them for 6 months, vanishes." "Anything illegal?" Caleb asked. "Not yet. But if he and your brother's wife are partnering up, tell Everett to get his credit frozen yesterday. This guy isn't just slick. He's dangerous." When the call ended, I leaned back in the chair and exhaled hard. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was predatory. Dana hadn't fallen in love with someone else. She had partnered with a con artist, and worse, she'd handed him me as collateral. I felt sick again. That same hollow nausea I felt when I first heard her say I meant nothing. Only now it wasn't just about pain. It was about fear. Because if they'd already filed false taxes under my name, what else had they done? What else was coming? Caleb must have sensed it. He stood, walked over, and dropped a file on the table in front of me. "What's this?" I asked. "Next step," he said. "Everything Elise gave you. Everything we just learned. We're going to secure it all. Encrypt it. Store it off-site. We're also backing up your personal data, photos, emails, old tax records, anything they could twist. I opened the file. He'd already started drafting an affidavit, a paper trail, witness statements, a log of events, something that could protect me if things went legal. And suddenly I realized Caleb wasn't just helping me react anymore. He was helping me build a case. I'm gonna call Elise, I said quietly. Ask her if she can get more emails, memos, anything internal. Caleb nodded. Good. And when you do, ask her one more thing. What's that? Ask her if she's willing to testify. I froze. You think it'll go that far? He didn't answer immediately. Then, finally, he said, I think you're not just up against a cheating spouse, Everett. I think you're up against a woman who's already halfway through erasing you. So yeah, I think it's gonna go exactly that far. I sat there for a long moment, my coffee cold, my hands resting on the folder, my eyes staring at nothing. I never thought I'd be here, building a defense against the woman I once trusted with my deepest fears. But here I was. And I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. Elise agreed to meet again, but this time she chose the parking garage beneath her office. Not a coffee shop, not a diner. A dimly lit concrete box that smelled like oil and dust and had exactly 3 cameras, 2 of which she knew were broken. She told me which level to park on and to stay in the truck until she walked past. If I don't stop, she texted, you leave. No questions. Got it. I got it. I pulled into level B2 15 minutes early, heart drumming against my ribs like it wanted out. The documents Caleb and I had organized sat in the passenger seat, printed and neatly labeled. The dash clock blinked red. I kept staring at it like it held some secret message, like if I stared long enough, time would either slow down or reverse. At exactly 5:06 p.m., I saw her. Elise. Her coat buttoned to the top, scarf pulled high around her face. She didn't stop, just walked by my truck, dropped a flash drive through the cracked window, and kept moving. No words. No glance. Just a whisper of movement, then gone. I waited another 5 minutes before leaving, just in case someone was watching. And the moment I turned the key and backed out of the space, I knew I wasn't a bystander in my own story anymore. Back at Caleb's place, we plugged in the drive and opened the folder labeled Drift Primary. Inside was a chaos I hadn't imagined. Email threads between Dana and Mason, drafts of financial disclosures, a shared Google sheet titled Phase Out with columns labeled Accounts Moved, New Address Confirmed, Ev ACCT Last Check. Ev. That was me. There was even a digital itinerary. Flights, bookings, realtors, appointments with banks. It was all scheduled around me. Around my days off. My work schedule. My dentist appointments, for God's sake. She was building a whole new world in my shadow, like I was some lifeless prop holding up a theater set she couldn't wait to torch. But the worst part, the truly mind-breaking part, was the message hidden in the notes section of the spreadsheet. A casual line, written by Dana. By July he'll be gone. One way or another. Let's stick to the timeline. No mistakes. Gone. One way or another. I read that line maybe 20 times before I could breathe again. At first, I thought it meant emotionally, divorce, breakup, vanishing act. But Caleb wasn't so sure. She's not killing you, he said, trying to sound calm. That's not what this is. It's about your identity, Everett. She's erasing you on paper. Legally. Financially. Once she has everything switched over, you'll be too tangled to untangle. She walks clean. You're the one drowning. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on Caleb's back porch with a notebook in my lap and tried to remember every interaction I'd ever had with Dana over the last 6 months. Every offhand comment. Every innocent question she'd asked. Every time she'd encouraged me to sign something without reading it. And there it was. A lease amendment. From 3 months ago. She said the landlord had updated the terms, some insurance thing. She handed it to me while we were rushing out the door to a birthday dinner. I didn't even look. I just signed where she pointed. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're always so easy." I thought she meant flexible. What she meant was pliable. I texted Elise again. Asked her if she knew what the new address was on the fake mortgage application. She responded 10 minutes later with a screenshot of an email thread between Dana and a closing agent in Cleveland. The subject line was, Final Walkthrough, June 17th. That was 12 days away. 12 days. She's already moving, I said aloud, as the realization struck. She's not just planning it. She's done. She's leaving. And she's taking everything with her. Caleb leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Then we've got 12 days to hit first. And that's when it started. The plan. Not revenge. Not violence. Not public scenes or late-night screaming matches. That's not who I am. But what we decided to do, what we had to do, was something far more strategic. We were going to take everything she built and turn it inside out. It started with the most boring part, paperwork. Freezing my credit. Filing a police report to document possible identity fraud. Flagging my social security number for unauthorized use. Caleb had contacts who helped draft a temporary injunction against the transfer of property or loans tied to my name. It wasn't ironclad, but it slowed the gears. Then came the next step, preparing the truth. Elise had already pulled records, but now we needed witnesses. Patterns. Real evidence that could tie Dana's actions to intention. Elise agreed to wear a wire, her idea. She told Dana she wanted to ask her about transferring some internal accounts and got her talking. The recording was painful. Hearing her laugh about me again. Calling me soft. Mocking the way I never pushed back. Dana said, I'll give it 2 more weeks, then I ghost him. No warning. He'll probably cry. Honestly, I'm not even mad if he does. Tears are quieter than yelling. The worst part? She sounded happy about it. Like cruelty was her sport. That night, I took Max for a walk through Caleb's neighborhood. The dog didn't know his life had been gutted. He just wagged his tail and sniffed fire hydrants like everything was fine. I sat down on a bench under a dead street lamp, stared up at the stars, and whispered something I hadn't said out loud in a long time. I really did love her. And then I added, just to myself, but I don't think I ever knew her at all. What I did know, though, was this. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to be the ghost in her story. If she wanted a clean break, I'd give her one. But she'd never forget what it cost. The strangest part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the fraud. It was the realization that I had been edited out of my own life long before I ever noticed. Like Dana had taken a photo of us and, pixel by pixel, erased me from the frame while I was still smiling in it. And somehow, I let it happen. For years, I thought I was showing love by staying quiet. By making things easier. By never asking too many questions or doubting her when she needed space. But that wasn't love. That was compliance. And Dana knew it. Worse, she counted on it. I was predictable. Soft. Invisible when she needed me to be, present when it served her image. But not anymore. We had 5 days left. 5 days until she signed papers on a house in Ohio that I was apparently co-buying with her affair partner. 5 days until she initiated the ghost protocol she joked about in a text Elise recovered, her name for when she planned to cut all ties and vanish, leaving me financially wrecked and emotionally gutted. 5 days. And now it was my turn to vanish. But on my terms. I packed up everything I needed. Flash drives, signed affidavits, backup documents, and drove back to the house. Not to confront her. Not to scream or beg. I didn't even plan to speak to her. I just needed to retrieve the last physical things that tied me to that life before she could twist them against me. It was almost midnight when I pulled into the driveway. The porch light was off. Her car was parked slightly crooked, like she'd rushed in without looking. I had half a mind to knock. To stare her in the eye and watch her try to lie one more time. But I didn't. That was the version of me she built this plan around. The Everett who would hesitate, who would forgive, who would quietly leave and let her sweep up the debris. I wasn't him anymore. I moved through the house like a ghost. Max followed close behind, ears twitching, but he didn't bark. Maybe he understood. Dogs know things we don't. I grabbed my birth certificate, old journals, family photos, the hard drive she never knew I kept. And then, on impulse, I opened the drawer where we stored old greeting cards, birthday notes, anniversaries, words she once wrote to me in permanent ink. You are the softest place I land. You always believe in me, even when I don't deserve it. I love the way you see me. I almost laughed. I stuffed them all in the trash bag and walked them outside. I tossed the bag into the dumpster behind the shed, then stood there for a long moment, staring at the house we once made a home. I thought about lighting the bag on fire. Watching the words melt. But no, fire draws attention. This wasn't about drama. This was about control. The next morning, I was already gone. I checked into a hotel under a different name. Caleb helped arrange it, and filed my final batch of reports. The banks had started responding to the fraud claims. A hold was placed on the mortgage transfer. The credit lines opened under my name were suspended pending investigation. Dana would wake up to a very different day than she expected. I had one more move to make. Elise had managed to schedule a meeting between Dana and her firm's regional director, something about performance bonuses and account irregularities. Dana, always image-conscious, confirmed the meeting without a second thought. What she didn't know was that Elise had also handed the director a red folder. Inside it was a full record of Dana's use of company funds for personal travel, inflated expense reports, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and, of course, her side hustle with Mason, who, it turns out, had tried to sell consulting services to Dana's firm under a fake name. When the meeting happened, I wasn't there. But Elise texted me 2 words. She knows. The fallout was immediate. She called me 7 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. She sent me an email with the subject, "We need to talk. Please." I deleted it without opening. That night, I watched from a distance as she returned to the house, alone, and stayed up pacing until sunrise. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but like something had finally been stripped away. The shine, the confidence, the control. It was almost sad. Almost. On the morning of what would have been the final property signing, I made my final move. I contacted the real estate office she and Mason had been working with and formally withdrew my name from all documents. When asked for a reason, I told them clearly and on record that I had never agreed to the purchase, and that the inclusion of my information was unauthorized and currently part of an active fraud investigation. The file was frozen. The sale was dead. And with it, the life she was building in the shadows began to crumble. Caleb and I watched the confirmation email come through in silence. When it did, he poured us each a glass of something strong, raised his, and said, "To ghosts." I raised mine, to never being one again. But I wasn't finished. There was still one final chapter to close, and I had to write it myself. The sky was turning orange the morning I returned home for the last time, not to pack, not to sneak, not to pull evidence from drawers or erase the digital footprint of my past. I came back because I needed to see it. The aftermath, the silence, the place that once held love, lies, and everything in between. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a museum of what I'd survived. Dana was gone. Not just emotionally. Not just legally. She had packed up what little she had left 2 days after the deal fell through. Elise told me she was called into HR, formally investigated, and quietly placed on indefinite leave. Mason? He vanished. Left no forwarding address. His shell companies folded like paper fans. My guess is he was used to that kind of exit. He was probably halfway into someone else's life by now. I stood in the doorway and looked around. Furniture sat exactly where it always had, like nothing had happened. But I noticed the small things. No perfume on the sink. No wine glasses in the dishwasher. The closet was still full of her seasonals. She must have left in a hurry. Or maybe she thought she'd come back. Maybe she thought I'd still be here, waiting. I wasn't. I gathered what remained of my things, some tools, old books, a few shirts she never cared enough to donate. And then I walked outside and locked the door behind me, knowing it was the last time. Later that week, I finalized the paperwork to put the house on the market. I thought it would hurt more. I thought watching the for sale sign go up in the yard would rip something out of me. But all I felt was light. Not joyful. Just light. Like setting down a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying for years. Caleb offered to let me stay as long as I needed, but I didn't take him up on it. I rented a small cabin about an hour away, near a lake I used to fish at when I was a kid. The place is quiet. Peaceful. Max loves it. He runs through the trees like he's 20 pounds lighter. I work remote now, picked up a side contract fixing point-of-sale systems for mom-and-pop shops. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Sometimes I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, just watching the wind play through the leaves, and I remember how it felt to be invisible in my own life. I remember the lies, the manipulation, the woman who once called me her soft place to land, and later plotted to erase me completely. But I also remember the people who stepped in. Elise, who could have stayed silent but didn't. Caleb, who never let me fold. Even Max, who never once left my side, not even in the worst hours. These people didn't save me. I saved myself. But they reminded me I was still worth saving. I never did confront Dana in person. Never screamed. Never demanded answers. Some people think closure comes from confrontation. I don't. I think closure comes from walking away, standing tall, and choosing to stop bleeding where someone else kept cutting. And for the first time in years, I'm not waiting for the next disaster. I'm not flinching at the sound of her name. I'm not checking my inbox for damage control. I'm just living. Free. Whole. And finally, visible, to myself most of all. So, yeah, that's the story. That's what happened when I overheard the woman I loved say I meant nothing. I left quietly, and I came back louder than she ever expected. Not with revenge, with truth. And that was enough.